May I have my attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Son of Abel, Adania Ogans Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you as a priest now very soon. It's now time to find the seats for Sabbath services.
May I have your attention, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Adania Hawkins. I'd like to serve forever as a priest starting very soon. It's a privilege and an honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Israel now in the sanctuary. I'd now like to turn to son of Israel, Adania Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. The title of my speech is Do Not Turn Back to Egypt. We cannot turn back to Egypt. Please turn to Acts 7, verse 39, found on page 847. It says, whom your fathers would not obey, they rejected him, so in their hearts they turned back to Egypt. In the 5th book of Israel, chapter 30, verse 115 and 116, it says, on page 261, verse 39 in the scripture we just read, whom your fathers would not obey. Get that now. But they rejected him, so in their hearts they turned back to Egypt. The Amplified Bible says it even better than that in the way they have it translated. Yet our forefathers determined not to be subjects to him, refusing to listen or obey him, but thrusting him aside. They rejected him, so in their hearts, they rejected him in their hearts, yearning for and turning back to Egypt in their hearts and minds. You can clearly see Yahweh tells us we must not turn to Egypt, but they all did. In your law book, Prohibition 46, it says, do not return to the ways of God worship and sin. Please turn to Deuteronomy 17, verse 16, found on page 162. It says, he must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For Yahweh has told you, you must not go back that way again. Please turn to Numbers 15, verse 39, found on page 114. It says, and you shall have the tassel, the tzitzit, that you may look upon and remember the laws of Yahweh and do them, so that you do not follow after the lust of your own heart and after your own eyes, after which you used to go worrying. Do not follow after your own heart and worldly entertainment, and by saying the God's names. May I bless your understanding, and now I'd like to turn it over to the next speaker.
And now if you all remain standing, I'd like to turn over to the first speaker, son of Yishal Abel, Deacon Yishal Abel Hawkins. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. The title of my sermon today is Practice Makes Perfect. Now if you'll all turn over in your books of Yahweh's to 1 Yochanan. 1 Yochanan chapter 3. And starting in verse 4, it says here, whoever commits sin transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. And look down to verse 7, it says, little children, let no man deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. He who commits sin is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of Yahweh was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Whoever is begotten of Yahweh does not commit sin, for his seed remains in him, and it is possible for him not to sin, because he has been begotten of Yahweh. So we see in verse 7 that he who practices righteousness is righteous. Now the word practice from Merriam-Webster's dictionary means to perform or work at repeatedly so as to become proficient, to train by repeated exercises, carry out, apply, to do or perform often, customarily or habitually, to do repeated exercises for proficiency, and the continuous exercise of a profession. So it says there to perform or work at repeatedly, and this is how we must be with righteousness. We have to perform it on a consistent basis. Not just some of the time, but all of the time. If you compare righteousness, practicing righteousness to, let's say, riding a bike, or something that you have to practice before you become proficient at it, you have to do it over and over till you get better at it. Like if you were a young child just learning how to ride a bike, maybe you didn't have training wheels, you may fall down a few times. Or the times you're struggling to keep your balance, maybe you're going down a rough path or, a rocky passageway. You can look at that as the tests and the trials that we have to go through. And, there will be obstacles in the way, maybe a pothole or a rattlesnake in your path. But those obstacles, you have to overcome them and you have to press on. If you fall in a mud puddle, then you go to the priest on 6th day night and tell him, Kahan, I fell in a mud puddle this week. And you have to get yourself cleaned off. If you turn over to Proverbs, chapter 24, and look at verse 16. It says here, for though a just man may fall 7 times, he will stand up again, but the wicked fall only once into destruction. So if you fall, don't stay in the mud. Pastors talked about when they would travel in wagons, and the wagon would hit a rut in the road. And in the second book of Israel, going on to perfection, number 31, verse 49, it says, sometimes it takes a lot of effort to get out of these ruts that we're in. Sometimes it isn't easy. It comes with pain, but we can do it. Yahweh says we can do it. He's talking about the things that we may have to go through, these ruts that we get into, and we can get out of them. Yahweh says we can do it. Now, the kingdom that Yahweh is forming, we have His inspired words. You can look at it as a contract, the guide, the requirements. It's all written in black and white for all to see. If we'll all turn over to Revelations chapter 22. And verse 14 says, blessed are those who keep His laws, that they may have right to the tree of life, and may enter in through the gates into the city. Now in the 8th book of Israel, part 2, chapter 18, and verse 41, Pastor says here, don't half-heartedly practice righteousness. And don't stand back there, disagreeing with me and say, this is not the way to do it. Yahweh has already told you, I'm going to bring it forth, perfection, in this time period. Well, the beast now is out to stop the house of Yahweh. And they worship the dragon. Yes, all the world is worshiping the dragon, Satan. Worship means service. Now either you've got your service to Yahweh, practicing righteousness in His laws and serving Him, or you've got your service to Satan the devil, serving her beastly system. So take your pick. Either you serve Yahweh or you serve the gods. First Diaconon says that he who practices righteousness is righteous. He who practices sin is of the devil. In the fourth book of Israel, lying and betrayal in the house of Yahweh, number 4, verse 121, Pastor says here, verse 13, no servant can serve two rulers. You cannot serve Yahweh and Satan. Remember, Yahweh is the lawgiver of the house of Yahweh. If you're trying to hang on and serve Satan and have loyalty to her, or any of the people who belong to her, you cannot hold on to Yahweh too. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both Yahweh and Mammon. You cannot serve Yahweh and anything else. Verse 122, it says, you cannot serve Yahweh and hang on to this world in any way. You have to separate yourselves from them and be loyal to Yahweh only. Let's go over to Galatians now. He said that no unrighteous one will be chosen to enter this kingdom. Now you have to remember this. If you forget what I say, you won't understand what I'm trying to get over to you here. In Galatians 5, it says that no unrighteous person will enter the kingdom. Now righteousness is set forth in the every word of Yahweh. He shows you what righteousness is. We have examples in both book 1 and book 2 of what is true righteousness. Turn over real quick to First Diaconon, chapter 2. And starting at verse 15, it says, the heading here is, do not love the world. Do not love the world, nor the things that are in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passes away with the lust that is in it, but he who does the will of Yahweh abides forever. Now remember the sermons that were brought out during feast and also last week. We have the work of Yahweh and then there's the work of Satan. Pastor says here you can't serve both sides. So as I said earlier, it's all written in black and white. The guide, the requirements, the only way to be made in Yahweh's image is by practicing Yahweh's righteousness. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 11, found on page 936 in the book of Yahweh, 1 Timothy 6 verse 11, it says, but you, O man of Yahweh, flee from these things and pursue righteousness, holiness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Fight the righteous fight of the faith, lay hold on eternal life, for to this you were also called, and have confessed the righteous confession in the presence of many witnesses. So fight the righteous fight of the faith, lay hold on eternal life. So flee from the ways of the world, and as Kan Yehuda put it a few weeks back, run from it like you would a mad dog. Resist the devil and she will flee from you. Now one tool that we can use, the Peaceful Solution teaches this, is setting your mind in advance. And in the second book of Israel, going on to perfection number 5, sermon date 12/14/91, verse 42, Pastor says here, if you really set your mind and if you desire righteousness, you can overcome every one of these little bitty things, just like Yeshua did by stopping and thinking. Yeshua's parents were righteous people. They trained him and guarded him. He was so guarded, so innocent, that he wasn't even really tested until later on in life when he went into the wilderness. So as it said there in the beginning there, he says, overcoming these little things, Yeshua did it by stopping and thinking. The basic teachings of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, to stop and think. And then, proceed with the right choice. Turn over to the book of Psalms, chapter 34. And starting in verse 14, Psalms 34, verse 14. It says, seek peace, pursue it, depart from evil, and do righteousness. The eyes of Yahweh are upon the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. Turn over to Psalms 37, verse 24. It says, though he may stumble, he will not be utterly cast down by Yahweh. Well, verse 23, it says, a righteous man's steps are ordered by Yahweh, a righteous man delights in his way. Though he may stumble, he will not be utterly cast down by Yahweh, for righteous Yahweh holds him up with his hands. And verse 27, depart from evil, do righteousness, and live forever. So eternal life comes through practicing righteousness. In Matthew 6:33, as we know, it says to seek first the kingdom of Yahweh and his righteousness. And Matthew 5:48, if you'll all turn there, Matthew 5:48. On page 732, it says, therefore, become perfect, just as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. So seek it first, above all else, and practice Yahweh's righteousness. In closing, if you'll all turn over to 3rd Yochanan, and verse 11. 3rd Yochanan, verse 11, and it says, beloved, do not follow that which is evil, but that which is righteous. He who does righteousness is of Yahweh, but he who does evil has not seen Yahweh. So don't follow what is evil. Follow that which is righteous. So let's continue to help our pastor and overseer to lift Yahweh up. Let's continue to have the attitude of servitude. And, even though the times may get rough, we can endure. Run this race with endurance. Hang on like that bulldog and don't give up. And with that, if you'll all please stand. It's my great honor and privilege to turn the services over to the great Kahan, Yeshua Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Please be opening up your books of Yahweh to Genesis chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39. Now, we heard Pastor speak about this situation. Does anybody remember what he said about this situation in Genesis chapter 39 about Yosef? What was it that Yosef did? He set his mind in advance. Now that's easy to tell somebody to do. Set your mind in advance to do something or not to do something. Actually achieving that, well, there's a technique to it. So hopefully we'll cover the technique of achieving it and how we can actually achieve these things. But here in Genesis chapter 39, all right, just for the basic story, we're going to briefly cover it. Now, Yosef had been taken down into Egypt, all right? So if you remember the story of Yosef, his brothers pretty much abandoned him, all right? He pretty much had a bad experience, all right, with family and everything that was going on. So he had a lot of things that could have led to depression. He had a lot of things that could have led to the point to where this isn't even worth trying anymore. But he made choices. He made choices, and he did things in honor of Yahweh, and you'll see why he did those things. Now, he was placed, in verse 2, he says, Yahweh was with Yosef, and he was a successful man, and he lived in the house of his owner, the Egyptian. It says, when his owner saw that Yahweh was with him, and that Yahweh gave him success in everything he did, that Yosef found honor in his eyes, and became his attendant. Potiphar made him overseer of his house, and put into his hand everything that he had. All right? So that's trust. Putting something into someone's hands to where they have complete control, to where they're doing everything. That's the trust that we see here in these last days. The same thing that we see Yeshua doing, working with the branch, beholding the branch, teaching him, showing him, educating him, making sure that everything is done according to Yahweh's laws. Here in verse 6, he says, so he entrusted all that he had into Yosef's hand, and he did not concern himself with anything except for the bread which he ate. And Yosef was handsome in form and appearance. Now, and after a while, the owner's wife cast longing eyes upon Yosef. All right, so she started lusting after Yosef. What was Yosef's response? In verse 8, but he refused and said to his owner's wife, my owner does not concern himself with what I do in his house, and he has committed all things to my care. No one is greater in his house than I am, nor has he kept anything back except for you, because you are his wife. How then can I commit such great wickedness? Listen to the words. This is where Yosef's mind was at. This is why he was able to refuse sin. How can I commit such great wickedness and sin against who? Yahweh. All right? He understood what this was. It just wasn't fulfilling a lust. He understood that this was a sin against Yahweh and a sin against himself. This was separating from Yahweh. He understood this and set his mind in advance not to do these things. All right? Now, this just wasn't a one-time incident. All right? He refused. Now, look at the next verse in verse 9, or verse 10. And though she spoke to Yosef day after day, so this was persistence. This was sin being persistent right in front of Yosef. This just wasn't a one-time thing. She tried to accomplish bringing him into sin over and over and over. But as a man of Yahweh, he resisted it. He stood against it. He represented. How did he do these things? There was a lot of things put in his hands. There was a lot of things put under Yosef's control. Yosef had structure. He had a structured life. He had everything he needed to keep his mind focused on his job, and that's what his mind was bringing forth righteousness. That's what his mind was focused on. He didn't have time for the stupidity and the gufidity of lust from this world. It says, but it came to pass about this time when Yosef went into the house to do his work, none of the men were at the house. So this is when the woman sought to take advantage, all right? This is when she tried to seduce him, and of course he fled, all right? He fled. So even when Yosef was doing everything right, he was still allowing to be tested. He was being tested to see exactly what he could accomplish, to see if his mind truly was set in advance not to sin. Overcoming sin, all right? Overcoming sin. The guys that I give classes to, they know I compare it a lot to dieting, all right? Controlling your diet. You always hear of crash diets. We go on crash diets so we can lose weight. That works great as long as you're on the crash diet. But as soon as you're off the crash diet and you go back to that same lifestyle, the weight comes right back on, all right? And so does the tiredness and everything else to where you can't accomplish your goal, all right? We can't do crash conversion, all right? It is a daily process. It is a lifestyle change to where you have to change everything you're trying to accomplish. You have to maintain it. It's not something that you can do here and there and try to reach a goal. This is something you have to do. Reach a goal, then continue to do it. Set higher goals for yourself. This is an actual lifestyle change that we're here in Yahweh's house to do. All right, the short-term goal is to lose the weight in a diet, all right? That's what everybody looks for. I want to lose weight on a diet. But that's not why dieting should be done. Dieting should be done for health. If you're a healthy person trying to lose weight, the weight will lose off, all right? You'll lose the weight. But it's the process. It's where's our mind. Are we trying to lose the weight or are we trying to do something to become healthy? All right? I know a lot of people think that it's a bad thing to take care of ourselves. It is not a bad thing to take care of ourselves, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not capable of doing the work of Yahweh to its fullest extent. All right? So we have to make sure we're here to serve one another, but if we're not maintaining ourselves well enough by eating the proper foods, by getting to classes, doing everything that we need to be mentally and physically capable of doing our job, then we're falling short in doing our job before Yahweh. Okay? The short-term goal is to lose the weight for most people or to stop committing sin. But without actually adjusting the lifestyle and continuing in a healthy, sustainable diet, the long-term goal to keep the weight off or to achieve the health is not achievable. You're unable to maintain it. You should never try to eat just to lose weight or eat better. You need to eat better to become healthy and sustain enough mental and physical strength to successfully perform your service in the house of Yahweh. All right, now how is this compared to overcoming sin? All right, on Yahweh 27, Pastor mentioned this. Sin ceases righteousness from flourishing in the body. Sin ceases righteousness from flourishing within the body. All right, so we have to understand this. We want to reach a certain point, and we can't achieve that long-term goal if we continue to eat the very things that's keeping us from reaching our goal in a diet. All right, you can go on a diet, but if you don't eat the things that you need, you're never going to reach your goal. The same thing in Yahweh's house. You're never going to reach, none of us are ever going to reach the goal that we have set for ourselves if we continue to feed junk into our lives. All right? The entertainments of the world, the stupid things that we see from the world, if we're doing those things, we're allowing bitterness, fall-aways, worldly family, these things that are pulling our minds off service to one another, those things are going to keep us from reaching our goal. Overcoming is the same way. It's impossible to stop committing sin when you continue to feed the lust that's causing it. It's impossible. You have to recognize the sin and you have to stop it. Set your mind in advance. Okay, turn over to Job chapter 1 and verse 12. This is found on page 953. Job chapter 1 and verse 12. It says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been proved, he will receive the crown of life, in which Yahweh has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by Yahweh, for Yahweh cannot be tempted with evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when what? When he is drawn away by his own lust and enticed." Right? When we allow bitterness to rise up and we start to, I gave a sermon a few years ago, and someone reminded me during feast when he came by and they said, "Why do we run when no one's chasing us?" It's because a lot of times we allow bitterness, we allow arguments, we allow certain things to take place within our life to where We think there's something going on that's not. All right? It's all in the head. All right? Well, we're going to cover that too. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his lust and enticed. Then, when lust is fully conceived, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it is fully matured, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Sisters, don't be deceived. Don't allow ourselves to get our minds to the point to where we're separating ourselves from Yahweh because we're actually fulfilling the lust that we seek from the world. Because that's what separates us from Yahweh. When we have lust that we're actually allowing to be forced into us or allowing into our lives, that's what creates the separation between us and our community. Right? This is a community. Okay? There's certain things that we do inside of a community to help bring forth a common interest. Whenever we separate ourselves, we're no longer a participant in that community. Let's look at somebody else who did that in Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4. I always hear the comments, oh, the house of Yahweh is trying to push me out. Oh, this and that. Right? What was Cain told? Genesis chapter 4 and verse 7. If you do righteousness, will you not be accepted? If you do righteousness, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do righteousness, sin is crouching at your door. The desire to sin is with you, but you must overcome it. This is what creates the separation here. This is what causes us to have those negative thoughts. All those things, the bitterness, all these things arise from the lust that we still allow into our lives. In the parenting manual, this is page 28 of the parenting manual. All right. We were talking about diet and stuff earlier, and the reason I want to hit on diet, because one time we had a situation, and I was speaking with Pastor on it, and the only question he had for me on the whole situation was, can you find out if that individual ate breakfast or not? Because the man was very, very stressed out, all right? Violence was coming forth from the man. Turns out the man didn't eat breakfast. Turns out the man wasn't having a healthy diet. Everything the house of Yahweh has here to offer us is for our physical, spiritual, and mental benefit. If we don't use it, we'll lose it. Okay? Here on page 28. Now, we all know the parenting manual is about children, and we're all children of Yahweh. So put ourselves here. Providing for a child's needs includes making sure your child has nutritious food, clothing that is modest and appropriate for the weather, and clean environment in which to live. All right? Clean environment. All right, we need to learn to clean up after ourselves. All right, no filthy messes and stuff like this, but this is also a clean environment. All right, no filthy language, no things coming from the world, nothing influencing our children into sin. A caring parent will also provide protection. That's part of that protection. Love, that's true love. Attention, all right, attention is something we have to provide. Whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, an educator, whether you're a supervisor, you have to pay attention. You have to give attention to people. Attention. Giving attention means positively reinforcing. Reinforce the things that you see that someone's doing positively, and they'll keep doing it. Healthcare, education, all right? Making sure that everything is done according to the laws of Yahweh. Making sure everything is done according to something that's going to lead to success. Positive moral character that a child can see and emulate. All right? So there's the big key. A positive moral character that a child can see and emulate. Everyone here is training to be a leader. Everyone here is training to be a teacher. It's right here in front of both of us. All right? The women have it over here. The men have it over there. We're learning to be teachers. We have to show forth through our actions. Food must supply the necessary nutrients that would include proteins, fats, vegetables, fruits, carbohydrates, and sugars. Now, the world's going to tell you all those things are bad. A lot of those things are. Fats, how evil were they? All right? We heard the great witness, all right? The one who stands for Yahweh. The one person that I heard say, fats are healthy for you. Now what are scientists saying? Yeah, we messed up on that. Sorry. That's actually pretty healthy for you, all right? Well, the same thing's going on with sugars right now. A lot of people cut sugars completely out of their diets, all right? You're going to see the mistakes that people are making because they're not listening to the witness. Trust these things. All the things the world puts against you, trust the witness, you will not go wrong. Also necessary are a variety of vitamins and minerals. Believe it or not, there are certain foods especially beneficial for the brain, yet most children rarely eat them. These include leafy greens, vegetables, fruits, nuts, lean meats, fish. Of leafy greens, spinach and kale rank the highest. Also considered brain food are the omega vitamins found in raw butter, cod liver, and flaxseed oil. Drinking enough water to flush out the toxins inside of our bodies, keeping ourselves from being dehydrated. Drinking enough water in a day can also affect learning ability. All right? If you're not flushing out the toxins, if you're not hydrating yourself, it can affect our learning ability. Dehydration has been linked to poor learning and poor positive character development. Make sure your learners get lots of opportunities to drink water throughout the day. Having a routine in your children's daily schedule for eating, drinking, and sleeping will greatly assist in their character development, learning ability, health, and well-being. In addition to all these basic physical needs, you must also provide affection and attention. A child who is never told he is loved, is never interacted with, and is left to play in a playpen in front of a television all day will not thrive. The emotional toll of this form of neglect could affect him for life. So we see these things, all right? We have to put forth effort. It's not just something that we can take and push to the side. All right? When things are put inside of our care, we actually have to do it to the best of our ability. You can't use the work of Yahweh as an excuse to where I couldn't do that. Because we know the instructions are, don't do one thing while leaving the other undone. Right? Nothing is put on us that we can't bear. So everything that's put under our hands, everything that's given to us to care for inside Yahweh's work, whether it be children, our positions, whatever it is, make sure we're doing it to the best of our ability. Sadly, millions of children are born every year to parents who never consider how they will provide for them, and these are the children who are deprived of their basic necessities, neglected, and abused. Set your mind in advance. All right, I was going to try to make copies of this, but my copier broke down as soon as I went to make copies. So I got one copy made. Set your mind in advance. All right, this is the character unit. Set your mind in advance. Have you ever heard the saying that it's all in your head? All right. Well, most people, aware of it or not, every action begins with a thought. Setting your mind in advance to maintain your positive character traits begin first by considering just how important it is to have a moral character. To be trusted, admired, respected, and known as an honest, reliable, compassionate person is something you should want. The next step is to make up your mind not to be influenced to do anything that will compromise your character. To make up your mind, set your mind in advance to not do these things that compromise our character. In other words, determine in your mind that no one can talk you into something you know is wrong. All right, so we're made up of what? Our environment and our genetics. All right, those are the two things we're made up of. All right, family's part of that, but guess what? That's genetics and environment. They're all combined together. Those things are around us, and we can't allow negative things such as family, such as people, such as things in our environment to affect us to where we make poor decisions. Set your mind in advance to always respect another person's property as you would want others to respect yours. Watch your thoughts. A very critical aspect of maintaining our positive character is being aware of your thoughts. Thoughts continuously run through your mind, which are significant in controlling your actions and decisions. A particular thing to be aware of is the negative thoughts that may enter your mind when you feel someone has wronged you. Some people become angrier and angrier by perpetuating negative thoughts about the person and the situation. This can lead to a course of action to satisfy the anger. All right, so when you go back to Job, chapter 1, verse 12, and you go back to Genesis, chapter 4 and verse 7, that was the pattern that Cain fell into. All right? He allowed anger, not because somebody did him wrong, but because someone told him, you're sinning. The way you are living your life is not according to the laws of Yahweh. You have to change what you're doing. If we hate someone for doing that, then it's because we want to satisfy our own lust. We're not actually coming into complete unity with Yahweh. We have to make a change. All right, heredity. On page 12 of the character unit, it says, before you were born, the combination of your parents' genes started forming your physical traits, such as the color of your eyes, skin, and hair. It says, did you know that the genetics is also responsible for the behavioral similarities which you share with your parents and other family members? Has anyone ever told you that you act just like another family member? Have you ever noticed similar behavioral traits between your friends and their families? Both positive and negative behavioral traits can be inherited. For example, humor and aggression. But unlike physical traits that are fixed and cannot be changed, behavioral traits can be altered. Inheriting negative qualities like aggression, for instance, does not mean you have to accept that as a permanent part of your character. No, we're choices. That's what makes us different than everything else that Yahweh created. We have the ability to choose righteousness. We have the ability to repent. We have the ability to recognize and to change the patterns that come within our lives. All right, Pastor made a statement one time that you can't change the behavior of an animal. Right? That's the way it is. Now, prophecy shows we're going to be able to have that ability in Isaiah chapter 11. We will be able to have that ability in the future, but right now you can't change the behavior of an animal. Right? That's why the law says a bull that's known for goring people must be put to death, because you can't change that. Once it's shown that this is what this animal is, you can't change it. We're not animals. Right? A lot of scriptures compare us to animals, brute beasts, that mentality. Right? We can make changes. We can make choices. We can improve ourselves. A lot of times with animals, what you see with animals is you see fear aggression or you see controlled aggression. Fear aggression comes inside of an animal from poor genetics or lack of education. Right? So you can actually train animals to think. Right? You can actually teach them to control their impulses by teaching them how to react in certain situations. Right? Humans are the same way. We can learn how to control those things, but we can do it by making choices. Animals can't do this. They're not able to do this. They're able to be taught how to do things, but they're always going to resort back to what? Their genetics. Humans, we don't have to resort back to our genetics. We can actually change our genetics. We can allow Yahweh's house to shape us and mold us and create us into a perfect priesthood if we allow Yahweh's house to. That's the ability Yahweh's house has here in these last days. On page 17 of the character unit, we also have the environment. Now, the environment is everything that surrounds us. Yahweh gives us a structured environment and puts us here in Yahweh's house. If we don't use this environment that Yahweh is giving us, then we're falling short. Right? Everything we have need of to succeed is placed right in front of us. We just have to set our mind in advance to use it and to actually apply these things we're learning inside Yahweh's house. And here's, if I set my mind in advance to serve others, and I value the members of the family of Yahweh greater than I value my own personal desires, then I now have the determined to sin never again and to remain in the house of Yahweh forever. I will maintain my character by making choices that will help me serve others. This includes healthy diet, involvement in my community, setting a positive example, and seeking the house of Yahweh first. And when I seek the house of Yahweh first, what do I do when I seek the house of Yahweh? I go to the priest and I ask, how do I serve Yahweh? How do I serve my brothers? How do I serve my sisters? How do I serve the house of Yahweh? All right? Ask. Circle that. Underline it. Trust me. All right? At this time, if you'll go ahead and stand, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the great Kahan Matithia Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh, great Kahan. Praise Yahweh, great family of Yahweh. You may be seated. It's a privilege and honor to come before the great called out saints of Yahweh. The title of my sermonette today is Stay Holy, Obey Instructions. Stay holy, obey instructions. And for your notes, positive law number 20, which is in the back of your book of Yahweh's if you have a newer book of Yahweh on page 1b. Positive law number 20 is build the holy house of Yahweh. Build the holy house of Yahweh. Yahweh refers a lot throughout the scriptures about building and putting things together and how we are builders of this great house. Just recently, pastors asked us to help him in lifting up Yahweh. You know, and if you've ever been involved with building, you see that you have to lift things up, you have to build up things. You start with a foundation, you build things up. Positive law number 20 is found in Exodus chapter 25, verses 8 through 9. Exodus chapter 25, verses 8 through 9, which is found on page 65 of the book of Yahweh. We can see here the importance of building the house of Yahweh. And what is the house of Yahweh? Remember what Pastor said. It's not these beams or this building or this roof. You know, we are the house of Yahweh ourselves. Exodus chapter 25 verses 8 through 9 says, And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, according to all that I show you, after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishing, exactly so you may make it. So shall you make it. Okay, so you can see here, according to the pattern that I show you, and after the pattern of the tabernacle. And if you jump over, you can hold your place there in Exodus, we'll be coming back. But if you jump over to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, found on page 891. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And we're going to be reading verse 19. And we're going to see here this building has to be within ourselves. You know, and in order to stay holy in the great house of Yahweh, in order for us to live holy lives and build holy bodies, we have to be obeying the instructions that come forth from the great house of Yahweh, which is being guided and directed and led by Yahweh's last day's witness, Yahweh Hawkins. And 1 Corinthians 6 verse 19 says, "Or do you not know that your body is the sanctuary of Spirit Holy in you, which you have from Yahweh, and you are not your own? For you were bought with a price, therefore glorify Yahweh in your body and in your spirit, which are Yahweh's." So we should be glorifying Father Yahweh in our body and in our spirit. Now, if you could jump back to Exodus there on page 64, we're going to be reading Exodus chapter 23. Exodus 23, verses 20 through 22. And in Exodus chapter 23, verse 20, it said, "Behold, I am sending Amalek in front of you to keep you in that way." Remember, Pastor Israel Hawkins is Yahweh's seventh Malek. "I'm sending Amalek in front of you to keep you in that way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Attend to him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not forgive your transgressions, for my name is in him. But if you will truly obey what he says and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries." So if we're obedient to the instructions that Yahweh gives, then we will have this protection that we read about in Psalms chapter 91. Now I have an article here, because the Great House of Yahweh, we've been given many instructions over the years, and I was trying to think back exactly when we received the instruction, but I know it's been, 12 to 15 years or so. I don't know, time kind of flies by these days, and you think one moment something's taken place like just a couple months ago, but it ends up being many years ago. But the Great House of Yahweh warned us against coming into contact with uncleanness, and specifically the uncleanness that comes through the use of public restrooms out in society today. And there's an article that came out here recently this year, the beginning of this year, Roman 1/9/2018. This article here is from CNN.com. It was carried by some other news sources, but I'll be reading the CNN.com article. And the article reads, 2,000 7-Eleven customers possibly exposed to hepatitis A in Utah. Of course, 7-Eleven's a convenience store, like a gas station, a convenience store, and they have snacks and different things. But it says, health officials in Salt Lake County, Utah, are warning residents that an estimated 2,000 of them could have been exposed to hepatitis A at a local 7-Eleven convenience store. People who visited the location in West Jordan between Roman 12:26 and Roman 1:3 could be at risk if they used a restroom in the store or consumed certain food items, according to the Salt Lake County Health Department. The possible hepatitis A exposure occurred when an infected employee worked while ill and potentially handled certain items on the store, the department said on first day. The case is believed to be connected to a wider hepatitis A outbreak in the area that has been ongoing since the Roman 8th month. Customers who use the restroom, so you can see customers who use the restroom or consumed a fountain drink, fresh fruit. They have these fresh fruit stands supposedly with their chopped up fruit that's all nice and supposed to be fresh and healthy for you, right? It's supposed to be beneficial. Fresh fruit or food from the hot food case should contact the county health department to get information about receiving a preventative hepatitis A injection. So they tried to, put a Band-Aid on a problem they have, but you can see here, it talks about prepackaged items don't pose a risk of exposure. So you can see the exposure come through the contact. And the House of Yahweh warned many, many years ago about specifically not using public restrooms, or if we at all have to, that we have to guard against the uncleanness, and we need to count these 7 days to make sure that we haven't contracted something and we're not spreading it to others. But also we've been warned about partaking of foods that have been handled by unclean hands. Pastor said, do not touch the things which are unclean or have been touched by the unclean. How this actually spreads. It spreads from the individual to the item, and then you could take these things into your body, and you think you're eating some, healthy, fresh fruit, or, it was clean food, it was chicken, or, it was French fries, or just potatoes, how can that harm me? But we can see here how the uncleanness can spread from an individual to our bodies by not following the instructions that were given by the Great House of Yahweh. And it says here in this article that as of second day afternoon, 256 people have been referred to the county health department. The estimate of 2,000 residents is based on the store's average sales volume, the health department said. So they're kind of guessing about how many people might have came into contact with this. It says hepatitis A is a highly contagious liver disease caused by the hepatitis A virus and is most frequently transmitted by eating food or drinking water, handled by someone who has not properly washed their hands. And it can also be spread by other immoral activities. Symptoms which include nausea, vomiting, fever, and fatigue. Okay, so you can see here the warning that was given many, many years ago. And you can start to see, and there was a couple other articles that had come out last year, the end of last year, you can start to see how science and the health departments, they're starting to catch up to the things that cause some of these sicknesses. If you be turning over here to Isaiah chapter 52, Isaiah chapter 52, and if you write down for your notes the first book of Israel chapter 34, verses 65 to 69, which is a sermon Pastor gave on Romans 4:10, 2014. This was 2004, I'm sorry. Romans 4:10, 2004. It's the first book of Israel, chapter 34, verses 65 through 69. And Pastor was reading here in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14, "Therefore come out from among them, be you separate from them." Now if you put that together with "do not have any fellowship with the unbelievers" in verse 14, you will see what he is saying. Do not have any fellowship with them. You know, you might be working on a job or something and they're offering you, a snack or a fried chicken leg or, a drink or something that they've prepared for you. Don't have fellowship with them. Sometimes we may be in a situation where we have to work amongst unbelievers, but we don't have to be sharing things and receiving the uncleanness from them. We can still put guards against these things without being an offense to them. Get away from me, you're unclean. Don't touch me. Don't come near me. Stay away from my food. You have to be wiser than the serpent, as harmless as a dove. Don't try to make them feel nasty and gross. We know they're nasty and gross, but you don't have to make them feel that way, but you don't have to take things from them. It's okay to say, "Oh, no, thank you. I'm on a specific diet, and I got my drink and my food in my cooler. I appreciate that." Maybe ask that guy or something, pass them along to somebody else. Sometimes you may even take something and, then throw it out without them knowing. Depends on the individual. Some people are a little forceful on things, but we know that we shouldn't be partaking of things. We shouldn't be partaking of things that we can't guarantee is clean and is holy. And the only way you can guarantee holiness and cleanliness is if you're getting things from the great house of Yahweh, or you're following the instructions, praise Yahweh, or you're following the instructions that come from the house of Yahweh and you have that holiness in your house. It's very important, brethren, that we take heed to the instructions Pastor gives, because, a lot of times Pastor will give an instruction, he'll say, "I don't have a thus saith Yahweh, or I don't have time to explain these things, but I need you to do this or I need you to do that." And when we receive those instructions and we're obedient to those things, we're able to stay holy in our lives by reaping the benefits that sometimes take, decades or longer to actually see the evidence come forth through the news. The last New Moon film, if you caught it, they were talking about one of those skulls and how it was believed that was an ancestor of, the oldest men or whatever, and it wasn't until like the 60s, it was found in like the 1800s or something, it wasn't until the 1960s, so it was over almost 150, 200 years later, they discovered that these things were forgeries and they were false. So mankind, they're slowly catching up to Yahweh's wisdom, and the only way you're going to be able to attain Yahweh's wisdom is by strictly adhering to what's being instructed from the great house of Yahweh, and that's how you can have this holiness in your life, is by obeying the instructions that come from Yahweh. Now, Pastor continues on here in the first book of Israel, chapter 34 and verse 65, and he says, "Do not have any fellowship with them. Come out from among them. Do not touch the unclean thing." What is unclean? The people. Everything they touch. Everything is unclean. "And I will receive you," says Father Yahweh. Pastor says in verse 66, Yahweh has given us a way to cleanse ourselves. Let's back up to 1 Corinthians 6:14, because I want to point out a few things. This word fellowship, notice, please, when he speaks here of fellowship with people, he speaks with people. He's showing you that you are classified as being partakers with the demons and their worship, the demonic worship. That is what is shown in Revelation chapter 9. He says, "The world still will not repent after a fourth of them is killed of the uncleanliness of their sins that are being done by them or through them. This is what you are partaking of when you have fellowship with them." So we're striving diligently every day to stay holy and clean, and if you fellowship with unclean people, unbelievers, if you share food with them, or you go to their convenience stores and you get, fountain sodas from their drinks and stuff, all those things are handled by them. They have these bacteria, and it's even proven in the news and in scientific evidence, but we have to be strictly following what Pastor's been instructing us for many, many years so that we can reap these benefits, and so we're able to have this clean mind that we need. And we're going to see this here. Pastor talks about the importance of staying clean, for the importance of our minds working properly so we can be able to understand what's being taught to us. Unbelievers, for what fellowship, this is verse 67, the first book of Israel, chapter 34, for what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness? In 1 Corinthians 6:15, and what harmony can there be between Messiah and Belial? This is in all the versions, all the manuscripts. Many of the early ecclesiastical writers put Beliar. Beliar comes from the Soric literature. It signifies that which profits not. That which profits not, or has no profit, has no benefit. It normally carries with it a default that will start bringing you down. It signifies that which profits not, but also injures. These things which injure our body. Remember the proverb that says about putting a knife to your throat before you would partake of the king's table. We have to make preparations. If you have to go out and you have to be away from the house for a time period, you need to prepare yourself some clean food to take with you and clean drink, so that you're not, or you could go on a fast, you could do some fasting, but so that you're not coming in contact with this uncleanness. We should be at all, if at all possible, we should be striving to not use the public facilities, and if we do, just because, I have to use them, I work this job and I have to use it, so I'm going to be unclean 7 days. You still should have, some lye water, some thieves, and a little spray bottle. You should be cleansing and sanitizing the best as possible. It's not going to keep you clean, but it's going to, Yahweh willing, prevent you from coming into contact with these viruses, which could bring your health down rather rapidly. And in verse 68, Pastor says in the first book of Israel, chapter 34, what does the law teach? The law teaches that if you partake of certain things, you injure yourself. You injure your body so it does not function properly. One of the first things it affects is the mind. Okay, so you see these viruses don't necessarily, start causing you to have a rash, and you're like, oh no, I used the bathroom, look, my hands are bloody, they're festering with sores, oh boy. You don't necessarily see the uncleanness, just as Eve didn't see the death when Satan deceived her into following this false teaching. She missed what Yahweh said about, dying you will die. It starts a process that brings you to death. And it's the same thing with this uncleanness. It starts a process. You injure your body so it doesn't function properly. And one of the first things it affects, Pastor says, is your mind. You would have accepted this readily. You would have accepted it if your mind had not been deteriorated in some part or another. The only reason you fought against it was your mind was deteriorating. That is what you have to fight against now. So if we find ourselves having difficulty obeying the instructions that are coming forth from Yahweh's house, we need to recognize that our minds are drastically rapidly deteriorating, and we need to get on some cleanses. And that's what Pastor says here in verse 69. Now, if you will humble and cleanse yourself, this will also start working on the mind to cleanse it, and you'll not have the hostility that you have towards Yahweh's laws. This enmity, removing the enmity, as one of the apostles put it, this is what Yeshua was doing with the law, removing the enmity. When it clogs up the mind to where the mind can't think law or perfection, which is the way Yahweh made your body. He made our body perfect, and mankind's defiled the human bodies by their acts, 6,000 years of breaking Yahweh's laws. But these things start stopping it up, and then you start going against the law. You actually become a hater of the law and a love for the lust. In Isaiah chapter 52 and verse 11, it says, Depart, depart, go out from there. Touch no unclean thing. Go out from the midst of her. Be clean, you who bear the vessels of Yahweh. We have to be taking diligently these instructions that are coming forth from the great house of Yahweh so that we're able to reap these great benefits, so our minds can work clearly, so we can become these righteous teachers that Yahweh has called us to be, so we can achieve these positions in Yahweh's kingdom. Now, there's another article quickly here. It was from livescience.com. And the article was entitled, this just came out here 2 weeks ago. It was on Romans 4:10/2018. And the article was entitled, Restroom Hand Dryers Are Blowing Bacteria Everywhere. And it says, if you scrub your hands after using a public toilet and then use an air blower to dry them, you could be leaving the restroom with hands that aren't as clean as you think. What's more, the rest of you could now be covered in assorted microbial hitchhikers too. And it says, restroom hand dryers don't just blow, they also suck. When they hover up air, they also siphon in bacteria, which includes microbes carried into the room on people's skin and those left behind by waste after a person uses and flushes a lidless toilet. So you can see just the flushing of the toilet, which is something the House of Yahweh has taught for years, that just going into those facilities and touching those things actually brings this uncleanness because of all the germs that are contained within there, and then they get spread through the aerosols. It says that the bacteria which is left behind by waste after a person uses and flushes a lidless toilet, then after sucking these microbes up, the dryers spew them out again in abundance, according to a recent study. Okay, and this was done by the researchers at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine, and they published these findings in the April or the 4th Roman month issue of the journal Applied and Environmental Biology. And it talked here about how the bacteria that was captured, they were trying to see if the bacteria was growing inside of the air dryers, and they said no. They said the bacteria that was captured, it must have come from the bathroom air, possibly expelled into the air from the particles that sprayed out from toilets flushing, the study's authors reported. So you can see the uncleanness here that we find out in society today, in the world, and the things that we've been guarded against. If you be turning over to Chagia chapter 2 in closing, Chagia chapter 2 verses 12 through 14, found on page 716, you can see that science and researchers are starting to come across things that Pastor's been showing for many, many years here at the Great House of Yahweh. And so we got to make sure that we're really being diligent to follow the instructions that we're being given and to guard against uncleanness, to guard our lives so that we're able to stay holy before our Father Yahweh. And the way we do this is to continue to obey the instructions that come forth from the Great House of Yahweh. In Chagia chapter 2, we'll start in verse 13 here. It says, then Chagia asked, will they be unclean? And the priest answered and said, whatever he touches will be unclean. Then Chagia answered and said in Chagia 2:14, so it is with this people and so it is with this nation before me, says Yahweh. Every work of their hands and what they offer there is unclean. So we can see the uncleanness out in society today. Even science is starting to realize these things, and people who are paying attention to the news in society, they're starting to see the defilement that's amongst them. We, the Great House of Yahweh, have the opportunity to stay holy by obeying the instructions that come forth from Yahweh's righteous house and from the one Yahweh sent to teach and guide and lead us to this holiness. I appreciate you for your time. May Yahweh bless your understanding. If you all please stand. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. I now turn it over to a great priest in Yahweh's mighty house, the great Kohan, Malachi Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. Royal saints of Yahweh, you may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. I titled this sermon, Remember Yahweh Before the Golden Cord is Cut. Remember Yahweh before the golden cord is cut. Let us open a book of Yahweh to page 442. That's Psalm 23. This is to remind us of our calling. Because, sometimes we have a tendency to really forget, why the earth was created. Why man was placed on the earth. Why Yahweh called us to his house. And we should always have in our mind the goal that Yahweh placed in front of us. Because sometimes when we lose focus of that goal, you see our minds just start, drifting from the main purpose why Yahweh brought us here. And, when someone have in their mind, we don't need our counselors. We don't need Israel Hawkins. We can actually see, at that point in time, Satan has already have a hold on their mind. Right? Satan already have a hold on their mind. Now, before we go to Psalms, what we have to understand too is, why the earth was created, basically, is for Yeshua Hawkins to usher in the kingdom of Yahweh. Right? Because this is what he is doing at this time. He is ushering in the kingdom of Yahweh. Now, how many of us can actually recall, before we came to the house of Yahweh, that Yahweh, we actually saw Yahweh in our life? When I say saw Yahweh in our life, when we look back at our past, we could actually see where Yahweh actually had a hand in our lives. Now, okay, let me even fine-tune it some more. How many of us actually came, we became very close to death? How many of us? Okay, well, I myself came close to death 3 times. From day one I'm speaking about. Right? From day one. And well, it's obviously my mom had to, she related that story to me. She said, when she was in the hospital, something just keep on telling her, hey, get up and go and check your child. She heard the voice again. I'm not saying her voice, but that was in her mind. Get up and go and check on your child. And the 3rd time, get up and go and check on your child. And when she get there, she saw a whole pool of blood. Because basically they didn't really cut the umbilical cord, didn't, put properly. The 2nd time it was drunk, then the 3rd time it was poison. And that 3rd time, when she took me to the doctor, the doctor told her, he said, woman, if you had only give this child any water to drink, that child would have been history. So, when we look back in our life, when we see Yahweh, we actually see Yahweh in our life. Now, let us just turn to Psalms 139, page 114, not 149, 491. 491. Okay, we're in the wrong direction. Let's look at verse 15. Our frames were not hidden from you when we were being formed in secret in the womb, skillfully woven together in the depth of the earth. He said, your eyes saw our unformed substance. That's all the microbe that Yahweh used to put us together. But in your book, all the days ordained for us were written. Even before one day even existed for us. So you could see where Yahweh actually had that before we even came to the house of Yahweh. Right? We was in Yahweh plan. How precious, valuable your thoughts are to us, O Yahweh. How great is the sum of them. Let's look down at verse 23. It said, examine us. Why Yahweh called us to the house of Yahweh. He said, examine us, O Yahweh, and know our heart. He said, test us. Test us. I know a lot of time when the tests come, we always griping. But Yahweh is actually seeking our interest. That is how Yahweh is seeking our interest for us to already overcome. And this is what the psalmist is saying here. He said to test us and know our thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in us. But verse 23 says, test us. Now, why do Yahweh test us? That the question, because we know we came to the house of Yahweh, right? So we have to know exactly why, what is the purpose why Yahweh is testing us. And the purpose why Yahweh is testing us is to prove that we will be faithful to him. This is why Yahweh is testing us, to prove to Yahweh that we will be faithful. Because when we look at so many things that Pastor brought out with the position that, we have been offered, where Yahweh first son, they left the first estate that they was offered. And this is the position that Yahweh is offering us. So Yahweh actually have to test us to see that we'll be faithful to him. But boy, when those tests come, it's a hell of a storm. Because over and over, we will see, petty little foolishness. We'll stumble and fall over. Pastor said in one of his sermons, we have to be doctors of the law. Right? And we have to implement whatever law it takes to govern the problem. The laws of Yahweh is means of escape. Every problem solved. That's why I say humble ourselves to Yahweh. But when it's seeking our interest by letting those tests come, well, I don't want to work with that individual. Someone will be talking to you and you're not paying that individual no mind because you just hate that individual. Why we were called to the house of Yahweh? Why? This is the government of Yahweh here. This is the government of Yahweh. And we have to learn to work with each other because this is, as Pastor said, if not forever, we don't really want it. Now, let's just look at the second book of Israel. Let's go to Ephesians first. Ephesians, page 9, 16. Ephesians 1. Let's look at verse 3. It said, "Blessed be Yahweh, the Father of our King Yeshua Messiah, who have blessed us with all spiritual blessing of the heavens in Messiah, because he chose us with him before the foundation of the world." He said, choose us with him. So when we ask ourselves, how long Yahweh have been serving us before the foundation of the earth? From since that time, Yahweh started serving us. When he started putting his plan together, that's the time Yahweh started serving us. And when it's time to serve someone else, well, that's a different story, That's the way the carnal mind, that Yahweh wants us, to get rid of, because we know the carnal mind is totally against the plan of Yahweh. But we love to let that carnal mind always kick in, and start ruling back, getting us back to that old man that we're supposed to, to put aside. Right? It said before the foundation of the earth. And this is what he also said in Job. He asked Job that question. He said, where were you? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Nowhere. The only place Job was is in Yahweh's thoughts, in his mind. And every one of us was already in the mind of Yahweh at that time. Let's look at the second book of Israel. Second book of Israel, page 9. And this is also going on to perfection. Page 9. Pastor said, did you get that? Turn back to Genesis 1:26. Yahweh planned this long before he created mankind, before anything was made. He had this plan planned out to create fleshly human being in the manner where he could build character, think, come to decision and set his mind upon those decisions firmly. This is what Yeshua did, and I have brought this out in sermons. I hope you remember these points I brought out on this. I brought this out in Genesis, where Yahweh created you in a special way. I have also brought out that Yahweh put different environment in front of each and every one, because each one of us is different. See, he created different environment and set monarchies to protect us from harm and danger until he got us to his house, where he could train us to become perfect. Now, where would we be if Yahweh didn't call us? You know, this is the question we have to ask ourselves. Where will we be if Yahweh didn't call us? We would all be like sheep, you know, heading to that slaughter. That is where we would have been heading. Now, in Psalms 23, it said, Yahweh is our shepherd, we shall not want. He make us to lie down in green pastures. He lead us beside still waters. He said, Yahweh restore our lives. Yahweh restore our lives. He lead us in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Further down it's verse 5. It said, you prepare a table before us in the presence of our enemy. You anoint our heads with oil. Our cup overflow. Surely righteousness and mercy will follow us all the days of our life, and we will dwell in the house of Yahweh forever. But verse 5 actually shows us, you know, the protection that Yahweh has for us. Right? Verse 3 shows that, you know, Yahweh restore our lives. Now it said, you anoint our head with oil. And if you look at Zechariah 4, verse 12, it said, Then I spoke to him again and said to him, what are these 2 olive branches which through the 2 golden pipe empty the golden oil through them? And this is the oil that is coming to us. This is this oil that our heads are anointed with. That constant knowledge that is coming from Yahweh constantly. That's the golden oil. It said, Yahweh restore our life. The word restore. The word restores means to bring back into existence. So we can see where that protection was. And Yahweh keep restoring our life constantly and bring us to the house of Yahweh. Right, well, what is the purpose? For what purpose that was done? Okay, let us look at Ephesians, because the whole purpose Yahweh restore our life and bring us to his house is to redeem us. Right, let us look at page 912. Ephesians 4. Let's look at 1 to 3, 1 to 6. The appointed time. But I say this: as long as the hair is an infant. Okay, let us skip down. Let us skip down and go to verse 4. But when the appointed time had fully come, Yahweh sent forth his son, coming into existence from a woman, coming into existence under the subjection of the law, in order that those who were under subjection of the law might be redeemed by him, so that we might receive the adoption of sons. So we see what to redeem, and this word redeem means, or redemption means, the act of saving or being saved from sin or evil. The action of regaining or gaining possession of something in exchange for payment, or clearing a debt. Let's look to Hebrews real quick here. Hebrews chapter 9. 9:27. Now it said this is what redeem means. You know, the act of regaining or gaining possession of something in exchange of payment. Now, verse 27, Hebrews 9:27 said, and as it is appointed for men once to die, but after this the judgment. So he said it's appointed for an individual to die once. Okay, let's look at Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. So he said it's appointed for a man to die once. 1 Corinthians 15:51. He said, behold, I show you a secret truth. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment of a twinkling of an eye. Right? So we see, look, we'll be changed. Right? But in Isaiah 43, in Isaiah 43, let's just look at okay, it's talking about Israel and Jacob, but when scripture show about Israel, speaking about the whole house of Yahweh, he said, because you were precious in my sight, you have been honorable, and I have loved you, so I will give men for you and people for your life. So what is this exchange? Right? Who Yahweh is going to give for our life? Well, those who left the house of Yahweh. That's the exchange. But Yahweh showed us, Yahweh showed us it's only by these two individuals that this could be possible, and only one the high priest is really working with right now. So let us go quickly over to Zechariah. Zechariah speak about these two olive branches, and we know that represent the two witnesses. In Job 23:10, it said that when he finished test me, I'll be like fine gold. So we see the olive tree, and also Job said it will be like in fine gold after we have been tested. Let's look at 1 Kings. To finish up here, let's look at 1 Kings. 1 Kings 6. Now remember those two main points. The olive tree and wrapped in gold. Right? Now listen what King Solomon said here. He said, in the most holy place he made two cherubim of what? What it said here? No, read it. In the most holy place he made two cherubim of what? That's right. Olive wood. Right? Olive wood. Right? Down in 27:28 said, he also overlaid the cherubim with gold. So it shows you the finishing product of these two individuals. The finished product. Right? And if we want, to qualify ourselves in the house of Yahweh, we have to stick with this individual. That's the only way we're going to qualify. So, saints of Yahweh, royal priesthood, don't neglect our calling. Don't neglect our calling. Let us stand firm with Israel Hawkins and remain in the house of Yahweh forever. And with this, I'd like to turn the service over to Great Khan Levi Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Praise Yahweh. Please be seated. This morning we're going to be talking about, the title of the sermon is Peace can only be achieved through following the example of our high priest, Yeshua, Messiah. So peace can only be achieved through following the example of our high priest, Yeshua. You look out in the world today and you see mankind trying to achieve peace in a variety of ways. They have their peace plans, their peace processes, their agreements, and everything else that goes along with it. And it's always backed up with force or the threat of war. If you remember Genesis chapter 49, it talks about Yahweh that has the scepter, but it's Yahweh's hands is on the necks of all of his enemies. And this is the way that mankind tried to bring about their peace. But the way of Yeshua is completely different, and I'd like to focus on that a little bit today. So reading Yachanan chapter 14, if you would turn to Yachanan chapter 14, found on page 832. Reading from verse 27, it says, "Peace I leave to you, my peace I give you." Notice what he says next. "Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. You have heard that I told you I go away, but come again to you. If you loved me, you would have rejoiced that I'm going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. So now I have told you before it comes to pass, in order that when it does come to pass, you might believe. After this I will not talk much with you, for the evil, beastly governmental system, that world order that was from the beginning, is coming. It has nothing to do with me." So this system of government, this form of government, their peace plans, their treaties, their plans for peace, it has nothing to do with Yeshua. Let's look at verse 27 again. He says, "Peace I leave to you, my peace I give you, not as the world gives, do I give you." So the peace that Yeshua promises, the peace that Yeshua brings is different from what we see in the world. Now this word peace, it's word number 1515 in Thayer's Greek English lexicon. It means a state of national tranquility. It also means an exemption from the rage and havoc of war, peace between individuals, therefore harmony and concord, security, safety, prosperity, felicity, which is peace, because peace and harmony make and keep things safe and prosperous. And it talks about of the Messiah's peace, that way that leads to peace, salvation. So these are some of the definitions of the word peace, and this is the peace that Yeshua promises. This is the peace that he brings. Now the world, on the other hand, their peace is a peace by force. It's the way of Cain. If you remember in the book of Yahweh, chapter 1, verse 11, it shows that they all have gone in the way of Cain. And let's look to Genesis chapter 4, and here we shall see the way of Cain. Just a reminder of some of the things that, Pastor has been teaching us all these years, and of course he puts it in almost every prophetic word magazine and newsletter, showing us how the world has departed from the ways of Yahweh. Now this way of Cain, reading from verse 12, it shows some of the results that came from Cain's way. "When you work the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall be a fugitive, and you will be ever searching for peace on the earth." And this is what you see going on in the world at this time, through their peace agreements, through their peace plans, through their conferences, through their meetings. They're ever searching for peace. Verse 13, "And Cain said to Yahweh, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall not be seen by your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, for there shall be continual war, vengeance, and retaliation." And this is what we see taking place at this time, the continual war, the vengeance, the retaliation, or the threat of war. Let's look at Revelation chapter 6, reading from verses 2 through 4, because we see this is highlighted in this particular seal, and it shows the pattern of man's government that we see in the news on a daily basis. So reading from Revelation chapter 6, and you see the Lamb is the one who is opening this seal, and it's being opened to us in these last days through the one sent. Verse 2 says, And I looked, and behold, a white horse, that is, looks righteous, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, that is authority, and he went out conquering and to conquer. And the bow, of course, represents the warfare, the weapons of war that they have. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard a second creature say, Come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was granted to him who sat upon it to take peace from the earth, that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. So this is the continuous pattern of man's way. The world promotes war as a way of maintaining peace and security. And that's the ironic thing about it, because mankind do want peace. You talk to anybody, they want peace, but the way of achieving this peace is through warfare. So they think that this is the only way that they could have peace is by the so-called killing of their enemies. Now this mindset of warfare leads to the exact opposite, which is insecurity, endless arms race, death of both those who are fighting the war and the civilians who are casualties. The killing of the enemies have never led to peace. You know, you could go through the book of Kings and you'll see that history. They may have had a temporary peace for a few years, but then the wars will come back up again and again and again and again, from one king to the next king to the next king. Even when you read of the example of King David, and I don't have time to get to that, what you have to remember that King David was the second king of Israel after King Saul. Remember, Samuel was the prophet who was guiding them at that time, and they did what to Samuel? They rejected him. They rejected Samuel. Yahweh told them that they were rejecting him, so they wanted a king. Why did they want a king? To be like all the other nations, to fight their battles for them. So this way of warfare was given to them. Okay, if that's the way you want to achieve your peace, so be it. Achieve the peace by the sword. So now you get from Saul, then you get to King David, and then if you start reading the history of King David killed a lot of people. King David wiped out men, women, and children, and brought those nations, he subdued those nations through force, and then they brought tribute to Israel. But this was a forced tribute, and it's completely different from what Yahshua represents and what he stands for, and how peace will actually be brought about in this time period. So turn to Isaiah chapter 9. It's really a marvelous history to understand, as Pastor has been teaching it to us, so that we could see why this pattern of man's way of peace should not be repeated. But in Isaiah chapter 9, we're going to read about Yahshua, our high priest, what he represents, and then the example that he set for us. In reading verse 6, it says, For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and his name will be called the Wonder of the Counselor, the Judge established by the mighty everlasting Father. And notice the next phrase, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from that time and forever after. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts will perform this. So yes, we know that Yahshua is of the lineage of David. You know, Christianity look at this scripture and many others, and they think that when the Messiah comes, it's just going to be a bloodbath. He's just going to be killing all the enemies, and then they will have peace. But this is not the way that Yahshua is going to bring about peace. Let's look at Psalm 119, verse 165, because we see this word peace mentioned twice here in verse 6 and also in verse 7. And in Psalm 119, verse 165, this is the same word peace being spoken of here. And it says, Great peace have they who love your law, and nothing will offend them, cause to fall because of unbelief or sin. If you look at the side note, C, next to the word peace, it says peace, to be safe in mind, body, and estate, to be complete, that which is perfect. Saying shalom, shalom means true peace, safe, well, joyous, health, prosperity, peace, friend, great health, righteous, perfect, such as be at peace, able, and holy. So this peace that is coming with our high priest Yeshua is more than just the absence of war, because we could see that there's safety in mind, there's safety in body and estate. There's also health that comes with the peace that is promised by Yeshua. So you could see that this involves the keeping of all of the laws of Yahweh, not just the stopping of the wars and the fighting, because that's as far as mankind peace goes, that if the wars stop, if you stop fighting, then you have peace. But again, the way they try to bring about peace, others will rise up to take the place of their so-called enemies, and then they'll be back to warring and fighting again, because they're not getting to the conversion that is necessary or following the teachings of our high priest Yeshua, who represented the way to peace. Now let's look at Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7 through again, and keeping the definition of the word peace in mind. For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and his name will be called the Wonder of the Counselor, the Judge, established by the mighty everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from that time and forever after. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts will perform this. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 9. Let's see this way of peace that Yeshua taught. We'll just look at a few examples, because Yeshua showed us exactly how to practice peace in the house of Yahweh. And this is the example that will be taken to all nations. We are taking it right now, but this is what we will be showing them. This is the true way to peace. No, it's not taking up weapons. It's not building greater weapons of destruction. It's not with nuclear bombs. It's not with swords, guns, bullets, and so forth. That's not the way to peace. That is not the peaceful solution. It will just lead to more killing, more death, and more destruction. In Matthew chapter 5, reading verse 9, found on page 731, Yeshua said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of Yahweh. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of Yahweh. Blessed are you when men will revile and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for greatest is your reward in heaven. For the same manner they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Now verse 9 again said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Now this is it's a compound word, so it's actually two words joined into one. The first part of it is peace. The other part of it is makers. So a peacemaker is one who is actively making peace. It's an action that is being described here. And I'll just read this from this verse, Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, from Adams Clark commentary. It says, "Peace is a compound of two words connected into one." And then he says, and this is reading from Adams Clark commentary, "For as war distracts and divides nations, families, and individuals from each other, inducing them to pursue different objects and different interests, so peace restores them to a state of unity, giving them one object and one interest." And that's what we have in the house of Yahweh. We have one object, we have one interest. A peacemaker is a man who, being endowed with generous public spirit, labors for the public benefit, and feels his own interest promoted in promoting that of others. So basically what is being said here, this is an individual who is involved in the work of Yahweh, knowing that whatever you do in the house of Yahweh, you're benefiting someone else. It's never a selfish endeavor being involved in the work of Yahweh. Everything that we do in the work of Yahweh benefits someone else, which benefits all of us in the long run, or the whole group as a whole. So a peacemaker is a man who, being endowed with a generous public spirit, that is, he gives of himself, he contributes to the work, labors for the public benefit, and feels his own interest promoted in promoting that of others. Therefore, Instead of fanning the fire of strife, he uses his influence and wisdom to reconcile the contending parties, adjust their differences, and restore them to a state of unity. That's what a peacemaker is all about. That's what Yeshua is talking about here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of Yahweh. So this is telling us to use our training, use our education in the house of Yahweh for the benefit of promoting peace, for the benefit of promoting unity among ourselves. Let's continue on and let's look a little bit more at what Yeshua taught us concerning this way of peace. In Matthew chapter 5, continuing in Matthew chapter 5, reading verse 38, it says, "You have heard that it has been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist one who is evil, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also. If a man wants to sue you in court, take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Whoever forces you to go a mile, go with him too." Now, Christianity this is in every Bible, in every version of the Bible. And if they were following some of this, the courts would be out of business. But instead, you see lawsuits upon lawsuits. You see retaliation and vengeance and so forth. So they're not following what the Messiah is teaching here. "Give to him who asks you, and from him who would borrow from you, do not turn away. You have heard that it has been said, you will love your brother but hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do well to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you might be sons, children of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun rise over the wicked and the righteous, and sends rain upon the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the publicans do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the publicans do the same? Therefore become perfect, just as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. What Yeshua is identifying to us is that following this way, these teachings of not retaliating, not wanting to kill and so forth, kill your enemies as you see in the world today, this is the way to perfection. This is the way to perfection. Having the non-retaliate, the thoughts of no retaliating, not hating someone, not holding a grudge against someone, this is the way to perfection. This is what perfection is all about. Having that mindset that we are being shown here. Let's go back to Isaiah chapter 9, and then we'll go to Zechariah chapter 6, because this way of peace is being brought to us in these last days through the one whom Yeshua is working with, which is the one sent. So remember what we read in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, that it says, "Unto us a child is born, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be the Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end." And peace there will be no end. Now turn to Zechariah chapter 6, because we know at this time Yeshua is in heaven, sitting at the right hand of Yahweh. So this peace that Yeshua is going to be promoting, that he's going to be bringing, is going to be with someone that he is working with in this time period known as the last days. Read in Zechariah chapter 6, and let's look at verse 12. "Speak to him and say, this is what Yahweh of hosts says, behold, the man whose name is the branch, for he will branch out from his place, and he will build the house of Yahweh. Yes, he will build the house of Yahweh, he will bear glory, and will sit and rule on his throne. He will be a priest upon his throne, and the counsel of peace will be between them both." Now notice what will be between them. Between Yeshua, our high priest, and Israel Hawkins, the branch, the counsel of peace will be between them. And this word counsel is word number 6098 in the Hebrew Dictionary of Strong's, and it means advice, by implication a plan, also prudence, advice, counsel and purpose is from word number 3289. And reading from Brown, Driver, and Briggs, it means to advise, consult, give counsel, purpose, devise, and plan. So the plan for peace, the plan to bring about peace, is between Yahshua and the one sent in these last days. And if you remember Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, or Micaiah chapter 4, you would see that that's what the house of Yahweh has been established for in the last days, is to bring about an end to all wars, but also to bring in this government of peace. So may Yahweh bless the understanding, and at this time, I'll ask for everyone to please stand. Now turn it over to the great Kohan, David Hawkins. Praise Yahweh.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's an honor and privilege to address the called out ones of the house of Yahweh. You may be seated. I'd like to speak to you today about a topic that had the opportunity to begin 5 weeks ago and speak on that Sabbath. And the title of the sermon today I can get the technology working that the prophet Daniel spoke about. The title of the sermon today is There Are Two Altars with Four Horns. Remember that. And this is part 2. Now the subtitle is, speaking of the two altars, what are they? The first one was the bronze altar with 4 horns. Now those 4 horns, what do they represent on the bronze altar? They represent the power of the quartet. The power of the quartet. And the other altar is the golden altar with 4 horns. And what do the horns on that altar represent? They represent the power of Yahweh's priesthood. The power of Yahweh's priesthood. Now from the 11th book of Yeshua, part 1, chapter 16, but Yahweh is predicting, and he lays out a pattern which he keeps in heaven. We see this in Revelation. Yeshua standing there with it at this time, guiding the work that's going to bind him to the altar. And so which altar is Yeshua going to be bound to? The altar of incense, the altar of the golden altar, the altar of incense, the golden altar. That's the one that Yeshua is going to be bound to. As Pastor continues here, he says, not the altar of sacrifice. He's not going to be sacrificed again. But there are 2 altars with 4 horns. Remember that. Now this next picture here, this shows the children of Israel when they came out of Egypt and camped in the wilderness of Sinai. And I'd like to point out to you, well, first of all, you see the quartet, the 4 groups of the children of Israel camped around them in tents. But in the center there, you see the tent of meeting and the courtyard. So if you can see my cursor here, this right here, where my cursor is, that is the altar of sacrifice, the bronze altar. The altar of sacrifice, the bronze altar. That is located, that's where the offerings were, the burnt offerings were offered, out in the courtyard. Now the other altar, the golden altar, the altar of incense, that was inside the tent of meeting, right under this cloud here. You see the cloud over the tent of meeting? Well, right under that cloud was the altar of incense, the golden altar, where the priests would offer incense to Yahweh. Now the next slide here, this shows the 2 different types of altars that were constructed that Moshe was commanded by Yahweh. He was shown the pattern and he was instructed to build these 2 altars. The one in the center is the bronze altar, the altar of sacrifice. And you see the 4 horns on this altar in the center, and you see the lamb being offered. It reminds me, I think of our great high priest Yeshua, the Lamb of Yahweh. being bound on the bound on the bronze altar, the sacrificial altar, as Pastor has said, and offered up. And he was offered under the authority of the quartet, the Levitical priesthood. And now the other objects here in this picture, on the left you have the altar of incense, the golden altar, and there you see the smoke of the incense arising from it. Over on the right here you had the laver, which contained the water that the priest used to wash their hands and feet. Now, the children of Israel, when they came out of Egypt, they made a choice in who they wanted to serve. And the title of this scripture here is Choosing the Power of the Quartet Instead of the Power of the Priesthood. 1 Samuel 8, verse 5, where the elders of Israel came to Samuel, saying to him, "You are old, and your sons do not walk in your way. Appoint us a king to judge us, just as the other nations." But these things displeased Samuel, especially when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." Then Samuel prayed to Yahweh. Yahweh answered Samuel and said, "Listen to all the words the people speak to you, for they have not rejected you, Samuel. They have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Just as they have done to me from the day I brought them out of Egypt to this very day, they are now doing to you. They are forsaking me, Yahweh, in order to serve gods." From the 11th book of Israel, chapter 16, Yahweh's last days witness, Yisrael Hawkins, spoke saying, "Remember the lampstand that he gave to Moshe. And he said, make all things according to the pattern." In that pattern, of course, were two altars, one for the butchering of the sacrifice. Remember that one where they would tie the sacrifice to the altar. That was one. It had 4 horns that they tied the sacrifice to. They bound him with cords to the 4 horns. Well, of course, those 4 horns represent something here. And yes, they do. The sacrificial altar, the horns on the sacrificial altar, represented the power of the quartet, which was an unrighteous power, not in unity with our Heavenly Father Yahweh. From Exodus chapter 27, where Moshe was instructed, in verse 2, he said, "Make a horn at each of the 4 corners, so that the horns of the altar are of one piece." Now, the word horns there is Hebrew word 7161, and it means a horn as projecting, resemblance to an elephant's tooth, a corner of an altar, a peak of a mountain can be referred to as a horn. But the main thing I'd like you to grasp from this definition is that the horn means figuratively power. It means power. And the horns on the 2 different types of altars represented power. In the sacrificial altar, the bronze altar, it represented the power of the quartet. On the golden altar, the altar of incense, it represented the power of Yahweh's priesthood. The power of Yahweh's priesthood. Now, the Hebrew word 7161 came from Hebrew word 7160, which means to push or gore. And if you have 2 identical animals, such as goats, for example, goats are interesting creatures. They give us great milk and that, but they like to dominate one another. So if you have 2 different animals, same size, one with horns, one without, the one with the horns will always dominate the one without horns. From the 13th book of Israel, part 1, chapter 17, the 4 horns of the golden altar. Now, Pastor said golden in his sermon, but he really meant bronze. He really meant bronze, because the bronze altar is the sacrificial altar. So let me read that from the beginning here. The four horns of the bronze altar, if you don't know, it's the sacrificial altar, where Yahweh said, sacrifice these animals and keep reminding yourself of sin. That was the purpose of bringing forth these animal sacrifices, as a reminder of sin. Because sin is what is bringing this upon you. Your sins, this is what's going to bring them, all these troubles upon you that he named in Deuteronomy 15, including now the nuclear bomb that he gives the full details of, even the fallout dust and the color of it, and says it's going to come down upon you until you be destroyed. Now let's go over to Hebrews chapter 10. And Hebrews chapter 10 covers a lot of information and understanding regarding the offerings. And so in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1, for the law, and this is the law of the altar of sacrifice, the bronze altar, having a shadow of the righteous things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with these same sacrifices which they offer continually, year by year, make those who come near perfect. It couldn't do it, but it was a reminder of sin. For then would they not have ceased to be offered? For the worshippers, once purged, would have had no more consciousness of sins. But in these sacrifices there is a remembrance, and that was their purpose at that time. But Yahweh knew that it was only for a time that these offerings would be offered until our high priest Yeshua would come, the perfect, unblemished lamb, and make an offering once and for all, his own broken body and the blood that the lanced him and flowed out of his side. But in these sacrifices there is a remembrance, a reminder of sin every year. Now this is a picture of the temple model, the House of Yahweh model here in the sanctuary of the House of Yahweh. And on this picture here, if you look at the center here, this was the sacrificial altar here in the courtyard, just as you saw in the pattern in the wilderness of Sinai. This is a bronze altar. This grating here was made out of bronze material. And the altar of incense, the golden altar, was located inside the House of Yahweh, sometimes referred to as a temple. But inside the temple building, you had the porch area, then you had the holy place, and then you had in the back of the building the most holy place. So, and that's where the altar of incense, the golden altar, was located. Now, going back to Hebrews chapter 10, looking at verse 4, for it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats can take away sins. Therefore, when Yeshua came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not want, but a body you, Yahweh, have prepared for me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you had no pleasure. Yahweh had no pleasure in these offerings that were given, but they were given for a specific purpose until Yeshua came according to the words of the prophets. Then I said, behold, I have come in the volume of the book. It is written of me to do your will. Notice the purpose, his purpose in coming, to do Yahweh's will. That's our very purpose in coming to the house of Yahweh, learning the laws and being obedient, to do the will of Yahweh, following after Yeshua's great example. To do your will, O Yahweh. In Hebrews 10, verse 8, first he said, sacrifice and offering, burnt offerings and offerings for sin, you did not want, nor had pleasure in them, which were offered according to the law. Then he said, behold, I have come to do your will. There he says the same thing again, a second witness for his purpose in coming. O Yahweh, he takes away the first priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, that he may establish the second priesthood, the priesthood of righteousness. And that is, the priesthood of righteousness is the priesthood whose power is represented in the horns of the golden altar. And by that will, we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Yeshua Messiah once for all. Now, notice at the bottom there, those notes, the Levitical priesthood serves the quartet. The Levitical priesthood was in charge when our great high priest Yeshua was sacrificed on the altar of death. The Levitical priesthood made the statement when Pilate asked him the question, what about this man? And they said, let his blood be upon our heads and upon our children. That was the Levitical priesthood that serves the quartet. Now the priesthood of righteousness serves Yahweh. The priesthood of righteousness serves Yahweh. Yahweh's priesthood will have complete power as symbolized in the horns of the golden altar. In Revelation 5 verse 6, our great high priest Yeshua inspired Yochanan to write, and I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne, and the four living creatures, the quartet. They're living today. They're living today in the earth, and they are in control. The four living creatures, the quartet, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, Yeshua, as though it had been slain. And notice what he has, qualified for complete power as symbolized in the horns of the golden altar, and complete knowledge and understanding, which signify and represent the complete plan of Yahweh sent into all the earth. And we're going to cover a scripture in Revelation 8, which talks about this complete plan of Yahweh sent into all the earth. In Revelation 5 verse 12, saying, with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb Yeshua. Now this verse right here, this verse is describing to the priesthood, those who qualify for this family of Yahweh that we're all striving to qualify for, the reward of and the giving of the stone of acquittal. These are the rewards, because you notice here it says, saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb Yeshua, who was slain to receive, and there's 7 blessings here listed: power, riches, wisdom, strength, honor, glory, and if Yahweh left anything out in those first 6, he includes it in the last one: blessings. Your blessings will be abundant. These are the rewards of those who qualify for Yahweh's kingdom. Going back to Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 11, and every Levitical priest stands daily ministering and offering again and again the same sacrifices, bulls and goats and grain offerings, which can never take away sins. But this man, Yeshua, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of Yahweh. From that time on, waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. Verse 14, for by one offering he, Yeshua, has perfected forever those who are sanctified. And Holy Spirit, also testifies to us, for after he had first said, this is the covenant that I will renew with them in those days, says Yahweh, I will put my law in their hearts. And that's what is occurring to us, little by little, layer upon layer. Here at the House of Yahweh, every Sabbath, every feast, a little more layering going on, the putting of the law into our hearts and in our minds. I will write them. Then he, Yahweh, says, their sins and iniquities I will remember no more. And you know what? We won't remember them anymore either after we qualify. But anyway, Yahweh says, their iniquities I will remember no more. Now, where there is remission of these, there is no longer an offering for sin, or no longer a need with our high priest Yeshua having made atonement for the sins of mankind, no more need for the continual burnt offerings on the sacrificial altar. And then verse 19 here of Hebrews 10, therefore, brothers, having boldness boldness, confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Yeshua. The most holy place is the location of the altar of incense in the Ark of the Covenant. The things that are closest to Yahweh. Having boldness to enter the most holy place by the blood of Yeshua, by a new and living way, which he has consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh, his atonement. And having a high priest over the house of Yahweh, Yeshua Messiah, let us draw near with a true heart, in full assurance of the faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. In Revelation chapter 8 now, and another Malach, and I put in the name of that Malach, Yisrael Hawkins, and I'll show you why. Having a golden censer came and stood at the altar, and he was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar. Notice, upon the golden altar, not the sacrificial altar, upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, and Pastor is lifting us up to Yahweh. He's lifting us up to Yahweh, the fruits of the work of Yahweh, the called out ones. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended up before Yahweh out of the Malach, Yisrael Hawkins' hand. And verse 5 here of Revelation 8, and the Malach took the censer, and he filled it with fire from the altar, and he cast it into the earth. And there were voices, and thunderings, and lightnings, and an earthquake. Now, this sounds like an event, casting it into the earth, but this is really talking about a time period. This is talking about the time period of the last work, this seventh era of the house of Yahweh. It's speaking of the last witness, Yisrael Hawkins, ministering together with his brother, Jacob, beginning in 1962, and ending with the prophesied nuclear destruction and that earthquake in these last days. And in Revelation 5, verse 6, we read earlier that it represents the complete plan of Yahweh, sent forth into all the earth. That's what this is talking about. And let's turn over to Jeremiah 23 and verse 28. The prophet who has a dream, let him tell a dream. He who has my word, the law and the prophets, the word of Yahweh, the law and the prophets, let him speak my word. So Moshe, Yeshua, Yisrael Hawkins, let him speak my word, the law and the prophets faithfully. What is the chaff compared to the wheat? The chaff is nothing. The chaff is a shell. It's a husk on the kernel of wheat that if you blow on it with any wind of doctrine, it's going to blow away and be gone. So the chaff is nothing. The wheat is what's precious for nutrition and substance. What is the chaff compared to the wheat, says Yahweh? Is not my word, the law and the prophets, like a fire? Like a fire, says Yahweh, and like a hammer, which breaks rocks to pieces. And now, with respect that the word of Yahweh being like a fire, look again at Revelations 8, verse 5. And the Malach, Yisrael Hawkins, took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and cast it into the earth. This is a time period of these last days. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. So is this any different than in Moshe's time? In Exodus chapter 20, verse 18, and all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. So was this a one-event situation? No. They stood off from the word of Yahweh, as we read about in the book of 1 Samuel. The word thunderings there, the Hebrew word thunderings, it means to call aloud. It's a voice or a sound, the voice of the seventh Malach. to call aloud, a voice or sound. And lightnings, it means to shine, a lamp or a flame. The law is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. The flame, as we see the menorah burning here, the 7-lamp lampstand with Yeshua represented in the center of the lampstand, and Yahweh's last day's witness, us, the house of Yahweh, represented on the west. And my word, like a hammer, which breaks rocks into pieces. In Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44, and in the last days of these kingdoms, Yahweh in heaven will appoint a kingdom of priests which will never be destroyed. It's eternal. It's eternal. That's the thing that when we make our day-to-day decisions, ask ourselves, is this an eternal decision? Will this build me in my mind and my heart in preparing for the kingdom of Yahweh? Is it eternal? Which will never be destroyed, nor will the kingdom be left to another people. But it will break to pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it will stand forever. In verse 45, just as you saw the stone was cut out of the mountain, this is Yahweh's plan, without hands, and that it broke to pieces. The iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold image that Daniel saw in the dream. So the great Father, Yahweh, has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will come to pass hereafter. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Just like every prophet and every law is sure. So Yisrael Hawkins, the 7th Malach of Yahweh, in Revelation chapter 10 and verse 7, but in the days of the voice of the 7th Malach, Yisrael Hawkins, when he will begin to sound, he and his brother began to sound in 1962. You could go back to 1934 if you want. It all applies. But when he begins to sound, the great secret of Yahweh will be finished, will be in the process of coming to completion, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. Now look at verse 9. And I went to the Malach, Yisrael Hawkins, and said to him, give me what Yahweh has given you. Give me this. Give me the laws and the prophecies and the teachings. Give me the little book. And he said to me, take it and eat it up, and it will make your stomach bitter, but it will be sweet as honey in your mouth. Well, looking at the word bitter here, it means having a sharp, pungent taste or smell, not sweet. But it can also apply to people, our feelings, and our behavior. And it's like this root of bitterness thing that if we're not careful and we let our emotions rule over us, a root of bitterness can grow up. And in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 15, the scripture talks about it. It says, searching diligently so that no one falls short of the honor of Yahweh, so that no root of bitterness grows up to cause trouble. For because of this, many are defiled. It doesn't say a few, it says many. So we have to guard against any root of bitterness being allowed to enter our minds and our hearts. When the priests are set apart during the feast days, they keep the three lights on the 7-lamp lampstand burning continuously during their 24 hours of fasting and prayer. So here you see the menorah, the 7-lamp lampstand, from the area where the priests are secluded. There in the center, you see our great high priest Yeshua. In the midst of the lampstand, on the left or on the east, you see the witness Jacob Hawkins, who passed away in 1991. And for the last 28 years, Pastor's been leading us, guiding us, teaching us, all by himself without the other witness. And you see on the right there, on the west, the 7-lamp, or the western light, under which represents our great overseer, the great Kohan Yisrael Abel Hawkins. And here's a picture of the two witnesses This is from the 2011 Prophetic Word magazine. Right in the center there, our last day's witness, Yisrael Abel Hawkins, and in the upper right there, his brother, Jacob. From the first book of Yisrael, chapter 24, in Yahweh's last day's witness, Yisrael Hawkins spoke, saying, he said, Revelations 9, verse 13, the sixth Malach sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar. This is the altar of incense, which is before Yahweh. Right here, he's talking about the law. If you don't understand the law and know what he is talking about, the four horns of the golden altar, there is no way you would understand this right here. I could probably spend an hour explaining this verse right there and why he referred to, notice, get this part, the four horns of the golden altar from which comes Yahweh's power and his voice like it did with Moshe. And this is why the horns of the golden altar represent Yahweh's power, represents the power of Yahweh's priesthood, the power to guard and keep Yahweh's way forever. And in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 26, but the judgment will sit, and they will take away man's government, to consume and destroy it completely. Then the kingdoms and governments and the greatness of these kingdoms we see now in the earth under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of Yahweh, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. It's eternal. It's eternal, an eternal kingdom. And all governments will serve and obey Yahweh under the authority of the priesthood there. In Isaiah chapter 30, verse 20, and this Isaiah 30, verse 20 shows the guidance of the priesthood in guarding and keeping the laws of Yahweh. And in verse 20 here, though Yahweh gives you, and speaking to the 2 billion who will survive this nuclear holocaust that's coming upon the earth very shortly, though Yahweh gives you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet your teachers will not be moved into a corner anymore. But your eyes will see your teachers. Your ears will hear a word behind you saying, this is the way. Walk in it when you turn to the right hand and when you turn to the left hand. Teaching them, showing them, guiding them firsthand in the laws of Yahweh. The four horns of the golden altar of incense, represent Yahweh's power given to Yeshua and the 144,000 priesthood. In Revelation 1, verse 5, and from Yeshua Messiah, the faithful witness, and the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler of future kings, speaking of those who qualify for Yahweh's kingdom, kings and queens and children, and ruler of future kings of this earth, to him who loved us and freed us from our sins by his own blood, and has made us a kingdom of priests. To Yahweh our Father, to whom belongs glory and power forever. This is the power represented in the horns of the golden altar, the kingdom of priests, to whom belongs glory and power forever and ever. And Yeshua spoke and taught in Matthew 11, verse 12, from the time of Yochanan the Immerser until now, the kingdom of Yahweh has been advancing forcefully, and forceful men lay hold of it. Forceful men, determined to overcome, men and women and children. That's who lay hold of this kingdom of Yahweh. From the 12th book of Yisrael, part 2, chapter 14, let's turn over to Micaiah, because Yahweh said nothing would be held back from them. Nothing is being held back from the quartet at this time. They are given every opportunity to bring peace to the earth. They will not be able to accomplish that, but they're given every opportunity to bring peace, to show that their way, which they brought with them out of the land of Egypt, and in fact, you can go back to Cain, the way of Cain. This system is given every opportunity to prove that it can succeed, but it will fail miserably. Let's turn over to Micaiah, because Yahweh said nothing would be held back from them. This is the puzzling thing for most people to understand. This system, if you notice, the four horns of the altar that were in those films that the Masons had, it represents the altar of death. The altar of death, the sacrificial altar. Not the altar of incense that we represent. The priesthood, the house of Yahweh, we represent the altar of incense that we represent, Pastor says here. Not the altar of incense that we represent, but the altar of death with the horns that will be cut off in our time period very shortly now. From the 11th book of Yeshua, part 1, chapter 9, Yahweh's last day's witness taught, saying, he said, look at verse 8 now. He says, the lion has roared. Who will not fear? Father Yahweh has spoken, but who can prophesy? Who can prophesy? Well, he says, you who can prophesy he tells you who can prophesy in the last days. Who can? Go over to Isaiah 44, and he tells you here, this is all on the two witnesses. They're the ones who established the house of Yahweh, and under the last day's witness, Yisrael Hawkins, he's the one who can prophesy and explain the words of the prophets to us, and explain the two altars to us and their purposes. He's the one. I haven't gotten off of the two witnesses, and I won't for quite some time, he says. It leads up to our Savior being tied in these last days to the four horns of the golden altar, the altar of incense. So, what are the characteristics? What are the attributes would you expect to find in this priesthood that will receive this power to guard and keep Yahweh's way forever? In Galatians, Yahweh's priesthood that will receive the power that is represented in the four horns of the golden altar will exhibit the following attributes, the following characteristics. In Galatians chapter 5, but the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of Spirit holy. And one of the sermons that was being played this past week on the House of Yahweh radio station, 88.9 FM, was the fruit of Spirit holy. And that was a sermon that Pastor gave in 1996. Pastor's sermons are all great, but that one is a classic. You should listen to that over and over again to get the things that he brought out in that sermon, showing that what feeds Spirit holy in us is keeping the laws of Yahweh, being obedient. That's what keeps Spirit holy growing and living in us. And in Galatians 5, verse 22 here, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, patience with one another, kindness, righteousness. It is the faith. These things are the faith. Meekness, gentleness, humility, temperance, self-control. Self-control, always maintaining self-control. Such things are not against any law. No, in fact, they are the fruits of the law, the fruits of Spirit holy. And now in Exodus chapter 34, verse 6, Yahweh, in giving Moshe the pattern that he showed him on the mountain, that he showed him when the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, Yahweh showed Moshe his strength, his character. And these are the 13 attributes, which will be the attributes that the priesthood will have also. In Exodus chapter 34, verse 6, Yahweh passed in front of him and proclaimed, Yahweh passed in front of Moshe and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, Almighty, merciful and compassionate, long-suffering. So if we have to, we need to grasp onto these characteristics in our hearts and in our minds and practice them, because these are the attributes of Yahweh's priesthood as represented in the horns of the golden altar, Yahweh's power. Almighty, merciful, and compassionate, long-suffering, abounding in righteousness and truth. In Exodus, continuing then, in Exodus 34, verse 7, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but notice also, but by no means leaving unpunished those who are guilty. The law lists the consequences of sin. The law lists the consequences of sin. And Yahweh says, by no means leaving unpunished those who are guilty, who visits the sins of the fathers upon the children, and the consequences of the sins of the fathers upon the children, and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. And he, Yahweh, said, I am making a covenant with you. You know, he's putting the law in our hearts and our minds. He's writing it there. He's making it a permanent part of our DNA. He's making it part of us. I am making a covenant with you in front of all your people. I will do marvels. You know, Yahweh did marvels for the children of Israel when they were obedient, when they rejected Yahweh and served the gods. He let them suffer at the hands of their enemies. I will do marvels such as have not been done in all the earth, nor in any nation, and all the people among whom you are shall see the work of Yahweh. Will see the work of Yahweh, for it is an awesome thing. It's awesome that I will do for you. You shall worship no hinder God, Elohim, at all, for Yahweh is zealous of his children. He's zealous about us, for us, and Yeshua is our advocate. Yahweh, who is zealous of his children, is a zealous Heavenly Father who is provoked by any gods, Elohim. So keep in mind when you look upon or think about the sacrificial altar, that it represents the power of the quartet, which is an unrighteous power. But when you look upon the horns of the golden altar, the altar of incense, it represents Yahweh's power and the power of Yahweh's soon coming priesthood. May Yahweh bless your understanding. If you'd all please stand. Let's all stand for a closing prayer.